friends. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for being with Maestro Mark Russell Smith for Concert Conversations, as ever brought to you with support from Wells Fargo Advisors and our friend Chris Connolly. And what a great concert we're getting ready for here at the beginning of March. Even though it's a little warmer than it was a couple of months ago, we get to go even farther south. Maestro, this concert celebration of explorations, how did this come together in your mind?
Well, it starts because there's just a big number of pieces where composers, have envy, have travel envy, or are envious of places. And so composers often write about places that aren't their hometowns. So places they're not from. And so there's kind of a whole category of pieces of composers writing about places that they visit or the places they wish they were, and so what's fun is that, to have a British guy like Sir Edward Elgar talking about Italy, where, the difference between Brits and Italians is, legion. And so, somebody as Victorian as Elgar trying his hardest to be Italian, or the quintessentially French Maurice Ravel being as Spanish as he possibly can be. I mean, that's a little closer. It's a little closer, but anyway, so it's just fun to explore pieces where composers are exploring places they're not from, and places maybe they wish they were from, or places maybe they wish they had some of the aesthetics from. So it's a little bit nerdy, I guess, but it's also just a fun way to explore big, colorful pieces of orchestral writing.
And there are some interesting travels behind the pieces that we're going to hear, and lots of transit and exploration and all that. But let's start right off the bat with Maurice Ravel, his Rhapsodie espagnole. And how
Right.
do you think he captures for an audience the feeling of a Spanish rhapsody?
Well, I mean, it's all about the rhythms, and it's really more in the very French way, very kind of cool and very suggestive. Like so we have the Malagueña rhythms, and we have the the dance rhythms from Spain that aren't overt. It's in the colors, and it's in kind of the suggestion of those rhythms, and that's where it comes from. I mean, Ravel, of course, an amazing colorist, and the way he uses the instruments of the orchestra to just paint pictures, literally paint musical pictures, is fantastic. And so, you know, we talk about impressionism in art, and we talk about impressionism in music too, which are kind of two different things. But the idea of Ravel just kind of coloring his just profoundly French palette, and the way he produces music, and the way he thinks about music and art, and adding that Spanish touch is just, it's just like a fantastic flavoring of that. And so it's certainly exciting, and it's certainly evocative, and it's certainly rhythmic, but it's also just very suggestive, and very kind of subtle and colorful the way he plays around with us.
Well, I'm very anxious to hear the next work on the program for a number of reasons. First off, I hope you'll remind our viewers about our connection through you to the incredible Roberto Diaz, violist, who will be featured on a work that I believe was written for him by a Chinese-born American composer, Bright Sheng,
Right.
whose life started in China, was disrupted by the Cultural Revolution, and yet has made a remarkable career working with the likes of Leonard Bernstein and so on and so forth. So I don't think I've given away even a tenth of the thunder. Please tell us about Of Time and Love, Concerto for Viola by Bright Sheng.
Well, Bright Sheng is a great composer, and a great American composer as you said, born in China. And his music, I mean, he is able to, through the Western orchestra and through Western musical gestures, really imbue Chinese feeling and Chinese art and Chinese music, and he does it in a fantastic way. I mean, of course, a Chinese orchestra and Chinese folk instruments are so different than our modern orchestra, our Western orchestra, but he knows both worlds so incredibly well. The viola is very much used like a, a Chinese folk instrument in a way. Certainly the melodies and the way it's written, it's super virtuosic. I mean, Roberto Diaz is just a virtuoso of the viola, as we've heard. He's come twice to Quad, and this will be his third visit, fourth maybe. Yeah, fourth visit actually. I think because he did the Symphonie Concertante, Mozart Symphonie Concertante also. I think Penderecki Concerto, Mozart Symphonie Concertante, and then the Jennifer Higdon Concerto was the most recent one that he did. Anyway, so he is a powerhouse, an incredible violist, but also interested in commissioning works and bringing new works into the world. And so Bright Sheng, really one of the important musical voices in America. He teaches at the University of Michigan, has all sorts of wonderful students. I personally have just had a wonderful experience conducting his opera Dream of the Red Chamber, an opera he wrote for the San Francisco Opera, and we did it at the University of Minnesota. And so I got to know him back in the fall and really had a wonderful experience with his music. And so I knew it would be kind of, for me personally, kind of a Sheng year, but he is lyrical and colorful and dramatic and bold and very theatrical. And that's what you see in this concerto. You see all of those things. The orchestra, the solos against the orchestra, incredible virtuosity, beautiful lyricism. It's just a fantastic piece. And I think only the second or third time that it's been performed.
Well, that was one thing I wanted to ask you about, because normally I love to get ready for my time with the QCSO by checking out some recordings of things, but there's just no document of this that I can find.
That's
So
correct.
It's going to be really fresh and new and exciting.
Yes, there are no recordings of this, right? You can't find it anywhere.
Right. And how is that for you as a conductor? I mean, obviously, we've got a very special in that this was composed with an artist in mind, Roberto Diaz. And so there's great insight there. But what does that do to both free and possibly inhibit what you're going to do with it?
Well, when I learn a score, I don't learn it from recordings necessarily. I mean, in a case like this, when if there were a recording, probably Roberto would be playing it and Bright Sheng would be conducting. And so, I mean, that's authoritative. I mean, the composer knows what he wants, and the violist for whom it was written knows how he thinks it's supposed to go. And so that's really kind of the one and only legitimate use of recordings, I think, for study purposes. When I learn a piece, I don't listen to it necessarily, because you have to analyze it kind of from within and from small to big. And so if you just hear the big all the time, you don't understand all the details. You don't necessarily understand the form. It's really important that you study the work in your own way and not learning somebody else's interpretation. Anyway, so for a new piece, of course, that happens all the time. When you conduct a premiere, there are no recordings. Composers often make midis of computer realized things, and so depending on how complicated the score is, that can be helpful. But I know Bright Sheng's musical language really well, especially having worked on this opera for a long time. But anyway, it's just really fun to dive in and to bring it to life, and not necessarily have other things in my ear, and see what I can create with that.
And that's what I would have to think is part of the excitement of the creation, because it's always a conversation, right, between you and the composer and the artists. And maybe as a conversant, you find something new that then becomes a discovery that helps the piece to grow.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled that we get to hear all this. Please refresh our memory as to how we have this wonderful connection with Diaz.
Well, he's the artistic director of the Curtis Institute of Music. And so he was in school. He was at Curtis a few years before I was. He's a couple years older than I am. And so we weren't classmates necessarily, but I got to know him actually through the the National Viola Congress. He played a solo concerto, which I conducted, and so we got to know each other as musicians then. And then he's invited me back to conduct at Curtis many, many times, and so we have certainly have a very strong Curtis connection as well. And he remains the artistic director and has just done great things for Curtis, who's turning 100. The 100th anniversary of the Curtis Institute of Music is this spring, actually. So yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, so it's not, that's not why Roberto Diaz is coming to Quad, but that is another part of my artistic life that everybody knows about. Everybody in Quad, they've heard about it a lot. But anyway, so yet another Curtis connection, but I don't really apologize for that.
And I don't know that anyone's complaining about it. You've brought
No, no, no,
amazing
not at all.
people to our community thanks to those connections. So
Right, right,
bring it.
right.
All right. Well, it's going to be very exciting. I would love to spend our entire time on that, but we have a couple of other works to talk about before our time is up here. And that is, we're going to head to Italy, and that's after being in Spain, right? Hugo Wolf, the Italian Serenade, which is a lovely, lovely work. And I just wonder how that came into your radar screen for this concert.
Well, because it's exactly kind of the premise of this concert, composers writing about places that they're not from. So Hugo Wolf is about as German as you can get, the great lead writer of songs, lead in German, and not really known for orchestral writing. And so I think I think this was a quartet. You may know it was a string quartet at its birth, or maybe a sextet, it was for small
Right.
ensemble and just strings. I think either quartet or sextet, I can't remember exactly. But it started out as a chamber piece that he just kind of expanded a little bit. So there's a really prominent viola part, which was from the quartet, and so Roberto Diaz is going to play that part. But it's very much a German enamored with the lightness and the frivolity and the sunshine of Italy. And so that really comes through in the kind of galloping, beautiful, forward spinning melodies but Wolf is a romantic for sure, and so there's kind of pseudo recitatives and there are all sorts of things, but all of it happens in a chamber orchestra setting. So we have huge orchestras for Elgar and for Ravel and for Bright Shung. We have a little chamber orchestra, kind of just basically kind of an expanded, string quartet with a couple winds, a couple horns, very small, but very colorful and just, there's nothing not to like about this piece, and there's nothing to like overthink about this piece. It's just lighthearted fun and a German trying desperately to be, a very serious German guy trying desperately to be a lighthearted, amore-filled Italian guy.
Well, I have to say there really is something about that. I don't have as many travels as most of these folks, but I had occasion to go to the Côte d'Azur and Nice and Monaco, and there's something about being there. It's a different take on life. There's a different palette, a color palette, and the way the light interacts. And I think it makes you change a little bit, and that's why I want to talk about the Elgar, because this particular work that that will close in the South, which is a sort of tribute to a little vacation he took with his family to the town of Alassio on the Ligurian coast. So think of the west coast or northern coast of Italy, and it's idyllic, of course, as you'd imagine. But I'm also thinking the whole time, he was in his 40s and he had his family with him. And I know you've led your family on vacations. There's a little bit of the family truckster there. You're dealing with, making sure everybody's happy and safe and all that kind of stuff. And yet there's something about that terroir that it just gets you to relax and see beauty in a different way. Do you think that was happening with Elgar when he was on a family vacation?
Hopefully. It's big. It's a big, loud work. It's kind of like the British Don Juan in a way. As far as the kind of sweeping musical gestures and the fanfares, and this is a Victorian composer, and using the full symphony orchestra, huge brass section. It's not light. It's not a light thing, but he's trying hard. He's a British Victorian guy trying hard to lighten up, I think, and he does it to the best of his ability, which, is arguably limited, that doesn't mean the piece is limited at all. The piece is sweeping and fantastic and colorful, and it's fun to play and hard, and it's uses all of the symphony orchestra. Just a big testosterone filled piece, you know. So it's Elgar, you know, wanting to be a macho Italian guy, but he's just really kind of this pretty stuffy British guy. But he does it pretty well. And so so it's a piece that like is just very un-Victorian in a way, but also, you know, you can tell who's writing it because there's still his language that's unmistakable. And so that's why I think it's so attractive. It's so great and just, yeah, muscle flexing and virtuoso and just very cool. I really love the piece.
Well, that is
And
a cool.
it's not played very often at all. It's
No,
really not.
and I think that's what's one of the things that's exciting about it is that you have these, throughout Europe, it's been at one level a conversation between north of the Alps and south of the Alps, the Mediterranean mindset, and then the Baltic mindset, if you will, or the North Sea. And you've got three different cultures responding to it: French, German, English. And that's more significant there than I think it is here. Here we are in a country. I just read an article about a place in Houston that sells a fusion between pho, Vietnamese pho, and Bohemian kolaches, right? And only in America. We take this stuff for granted, but the first time audiences maybe in London were hearing the Elgar piece, I have to imagine it was just mind blowing. I mean, sort of horizon busting for them.
Probably. Although, you know, I mean, Germans historically have traveled to Italy, and Brits have traveled to Italy. Everybody wants to go to Italy, of course, for obvious reasons, you know, for the sunshine, for the food, for the people. And so, especially Northerners, you know, Northerners who never see the sun, you know, love going to Italy. And so, you know, maybe they, hopefully they, you know, enjoyed it in the spirit for which it was in which it was intended. I think, you know, just kind of a dashing homage to, you know, to a place so different than where we're from, you know. And that's the point. I mean, this is so different than Elgar's other music, you know, in a way.
Well, before we close, I just want to try something here. You come up with very thoughtful ideas about concerts. This one is dubbed Echoes of Exploration. And I know that you have explored in very intriguing places all over the world. And I'm just wondering how, if as you're putting together a concert that is so, if you will, itinerant, if it brings to mind echoes in your own mind of explorations and discoveries that you've made. Do you bring some of that with you to your interpretations?
Uh, you know, maybe. I mean, I think the idea, I mean, one of the things I love most about my job is that it allows me to explore places and ideas and concepts that are just, you know, not part of my everyday life. When I'm conducting Shostakovich, I know, or at least I understand a little better, I think, about what the Soviet Union was like. When I conduct Mozart, you learn more about Vienna. I mean, you put yourself in a position to just kind of in osmosis like way just absorb these things that are so different from living in, you know, the upper Midwest in 2025, you know. And that's the beauty of it. You know, we're doing Prokofiev for our next concert, we're doing Elgar now. And so, you know, to dwell in these worlds, to do the Bach St. Matthew Passion, you know, to dwell in these worlds that are so different from the world in which we dwell, literally dwell now. I mean, that's what's fantastic for me. And I think that's what's fantastic for our audiences, because it allows us to explore things that are just outside of ourselves. And that's what great art does. And so, yeah, I mean, doing a program like this, especially, kind of calls it to attention, like how composers have done that too, and how it's a compositional, not compositional device, but it's a compositional aesthetic of me, French composer, you know, paying homage to Spain, or me, British composer, paying homage to Italy, or me, American composer, he's Chinese American, so I mean that's the least, he's traveling the least. But you know, it's just, I think, a very interesting way to look at some of the repertoire, and
Sure.
for our audiences to hear our orchestra.
Well, it is wonderful exploration, and on behalf of all of our audience, I'm very grateful to you, Maestro, for taking us along, and also for spending some time with us right now. Remember, friends, the Concert Echoes of Exploration will be Saturday night, March 1st, at the Adler Theater in Davenport, Sunday afternoon, March 2nd, Centennial Hall in Rock Island. Maestro, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you on stage.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care.